I found the photograph in the attic of a house that should have been condemned 30 years ago. The floorboards gave under my boots, sighing with every step like lungs that refused to die. I'd been hired by an auction firm to appraise what little remained of the Brigham estate, a once respectable colonial farmhouse in the hills outside Ipswich, Massachusetts. They wanted a valuation on antiques, furniture, silver, documents, anything that might survive the mold and mice. I expected another day of mildew and dust, nothing more. But the moment I pried open the trunk beneath the north window, the air seemed to tilt, as though the house itself had inhaled. Inside were children's toys, a wooden top, a headless doll, a set of marbles filmed over with grey. Beneath them lay a velvet-covered album, its spine cracked but its gilt lettering still legible. Hollinsworth and Company. Studio, Salem, 1890. I almost tossed it into the miscellaneous box. Instead, curiosity won. When I opened it, a whiff of old camphor and rot rose like something preserved too long. There were only 6 cabinet cards inside, each one labelled in fine copperplate handwriting: Father, Mother, Clara, Samuel, Baby Ellen, and the last, unnamed. That final photo stopped me. It showed the entire Brigham family seated before their farmhouse, the same one I now stood in. I could recognize the porch lattice and the tilt of the roofline even through age-darkened paper. Father in his 3-piece suit, Mother upright and severe, the children posed stiffly between them. But on the far left, half in shadow, stood another figure. A man, bareheaded, tall, expression unreadable. His face wasn't blurred like an exposure mistake. It was simply wrong. The features lacked definition, as if the emulsion had refused to take him. I rubbed my thumb over the image, thinking it might be damage, but the outline remained intact. A stranger, standing among a family that looked unaware of him. Could be a double exposure, I told myself. Early cameras were temperamental. Still, something about his placement, too deliberate, too balanced within the frame, made me uneasy. I turned the card over. In the same neat script someone had written, "Our guest." Nothing more. Outside, wind pressed against the boards, whistling through the cracks. I carried the album downstairs to better light. The afternoon sun fell in a weak rectangle across the kitchen table, revealing mouse droppings and a scatter of old letters. When I set the photo down, the window pane rattled. I thought I heard footsteps overhead, a light tread, rhythmic, as if someone were pacing. But when I went back up, the attic was empty. That night, I took the album home. I shouldn't have. Technically, it belonged to the auction firm, but something in me wanted to study it further, to understand who our guest was. I placed the photo under a magnifying glass at my desk. The more I looked, the more unsettling it became. The stranger's head tilted slightly toward the camera, but his body seemed angled away, as though he'd been caught mid-turn. His right hand hung oddly, fingers too long, joints misaligned. The background behind him was darker than the rest, not shadow exactly, but an absence of light. When I shone a lamp on it, the paper almost seemed to absorb the beam. I should have left it alone, but at midnight I scanned the photograph into my computer, adjusting brightness and contrast. As the image sharpened, something appeared behind the man's shoulder, a faint second outline, mirroring him. 2 silhouettes where there should have been one. I increased exposure. The program froze for a moment, then restarted with the message file corrupted. The printer across the room whirred to life on its own, spitting out a duplicate copy, even though I hadn't pressed anything. On that print, the stranger's face was clearer. His eyes were open, wide, blank, and fixed directly on me. I tore the paper in half. It didn't help. The original photo, lying on the desk, now showed a faint alteration. His head tilted a degree further, as if acknowledging that I'd seen him. The next morning I drove back to Ipswich with the intent to return the album and finish the appraisal quickly. But the farmhouse looked different in daylight. The paint was a memory of white, the shutters long gone, yet the structure stood as though held upright by stubborn pride. I unlocked the door, half expecting the smell of decay. Instead, the air was cold, dry, still. Dust motes swirled like slow snow in the light. I set the album on the table where I'd found it, but when I turned to leave, the door wouldn't open. The latch stuck, metal grinding against swollen wood. I shoved until the frame shuddered and finally gave. Outside, I noticed something I hadn't before. A stone well about 20 yards from the porch, capped by rotted planks and ringed with dead ivy. No birds, no insects, just silence. A neighbor saw me lingering and called over the fence. "You with the auction, then?" she asked. Her name was Mrs. Greeley, a woman in her 70s with a voice like gravel. I nodded. "Place been empty since the fire," she added. "Fire?" "Back in 91. Not this century, the last one. Whole Brigham family burned in their beds, so they say. Some think it started in the parlor, others the kitchen. Never proved which." She squinted at me. "You didn't find nothing, did you?" "Just photographs." "Best leave them be," she said. "That house don't take kindly to strangers." Her phrasing caught me. Strangers. The same word on the photo's back. I thanked her and drove off, but her warning lodged like a splinter. That evening I couldn't resist pulling the album out again. My house felt too quiet, the walls pressing close. I poured a drink, sat at my desk, and opened to the family portrait. The stranger remained where he was, unchanged. But when I flipped to the next photo, the one labeled Mother, my breath caught. In the far reflection of the window behind her, a faint shape now stood. The same figure, indistinct, watching. I swore it hadn't been there before. I compared the scan I'd made earlier. Nothing in that spot. Yet on the original, the shadow existed. I turned each photo in succession, and in every one, somewhere, a mirror, a glass cabinet, a background doorway, a blurred form had appeared, closer each time. Sleep was impossible. I left the lights on and dozed in the chair. Around 3 a.m., a sound woke me. Paper shifting. The album lay open to the last photograph again, the one of the entire family. The stranger seemed nearer to the camera than before. His hand, which had hung at his side, now rested on Father Brigham's shoulder. I decided to research the Brigham family properly. Old Town archives in Ipswich held ledgers and newspapers dating back to the 1800s. According to the 1890 census, Nathaniel Brigham was a mill owner. His wife, Margaret, chaired the Ladies' Temperance Society. 3 children, Clara, Samuel, Ellen. No mention of other residents, but a brief article from the Salem Gazette, September 1891, caught my attention. Tragedy at the Brigham farm. A late-night fire consumed the residence of Mr. Nathaniel Brigham and family. Bodies of the parents and 2 children recovered, the eldest daughter unaccounted for. Neighbors report seeing a tall man near the property earlier that evening, identity unknown. Investigators believe the blaze accidental, though rumors of foul play persist. The eldest daughter unaccounted for. That would be Clara, age 16. The report listed a tall man seen near the property, the stranger. I requested access to subsequent issues. None existed. The newspaper skipped the next 3 weeks entirely due to a press malfunction. In another record, a land transfer dated 1893 showed the property reverting to the state. No buyer afterward. It simply sat empty until the present day. That night, the scratching began. At first I thought it was mice in the walls, but the sound came from inside the study, directly behind the desk where the photograph lay. A slow, deliberate scraping, like fingernails dragging wood. I pushed the desk away from the wall. Nothing there. When I turned back, The photo had shifted half an inch closer to me. My reflection in the glass of a nearby picture frame looked wrong. The angle of my shoulders off, the expression delayed. I switched off the lamp, heart pounding. The dark hummed with a low vibration, like the air before a storm. I began dreaming of the house, always the same sequence. Walking up the path, the door already open, the interior lit by firelight though no flames burned. A figure stood at the base of the staircase, face hidden, hand extended. When I tried to look closer, I'd wake with my throat dry and my nails dirty, as if I'd been clawing something. 3 days later, the auction firm called. "We need your report," the manager said. I told him I was still cataloguing, that I'd return the items soon. After hanging up, I packed the album into a box, sealed it, and set it in the trunk of my car. I drove toward the river to dispose of it. Not burn, not sell, just get rid of it. But halfway there, fog rolled in, thick and sudden, forcing me to slow. The headlights caught movement on the shoulder. A man walking, bareheaded, in outdated clothes, dark trousers, suspenders, collarless shirt. For an instant, I thought I saw his face, pale and smooth as wet paper. Then he was gone. The fog thinned. The road was empty. When I reached home, the trunk was open. The box sat on the back seat. I didn't touch it. I called a friend from the Historical Society, Dr. Henry Lawton, who specialized in early photography. He agreed to examine the piece. When he arrived, he handled the album with white gloves, leaning close to the image under a loupe. "Curious," he murmured. "See how the emulsion here buckles slightly around the figure? That's not damage, it's chemical resistance. As if the plate rejected the exposure in that area. So a flaw? Not exactly. More like interference." "By what?" He smiled thinly. "Depends on what you believe. Some photographers in that period experimented with spirit imagery, double exposures to simulate the dead. Hollinsworth and Company had a reputation for that sort of thing. But this doesn't look staged. The lighting's consistent, the shadow geometry correct. Whoever he is, he was standing there when the plate was taken. He left with the album for further study. That should have relieved me. Instead, the house felt emptier, as though something had gone out with him. The silence afterward wasn't peace, it was absence. That night he called. His voice was strained. "I developed a spectral negative under infrared," he said. "The man's not alone." There's a second face layered beneath his, female, young. I think it's the missing daughter. The line crackled. "Henry, listen," he whispered. "I think you should—" A burst of static swallowed the rest. Then the call died. I tried phoning back. No answer. I drove to his apartment at dawn. Police were already there. They said he'd suffered a heart attack sometime during the night, slumped over his darkroom sink. The coroner hadn't determined cause yet. On the counter beside him lay a single wet print, half-developed, the Brigham photograph. Only this time, the stranger was gone. In his place, Clara Brigham stood smiling faintly at the camera, her hand raised in what looked like a wave. They buried Henry 3 days later under a slate sky. I stayed through the service, watching the priest's breath fog in the cold air. It was late October, the kind of New England autumn that smells like damp leaves and iron. Afterward, I drove to his apartment at the request of his sister to collect the items he'd borrowed for the Historical Society. The darkroom was sealed off, but through the glass I could see the stains, chemical spills that looked like rusted handprints. His notes lay scattered on the desk, every page warped with moisture. Across one sheet, scrawled in frantic pencil, was a single sentence. "She's inside the frame now." I didn't sleep that night. The wind outside carried a low hum that rose and fell like breathing. I thought of burning the album. But some instinct, something deeper than fear, told me it wasn't finished. Henry had found Clara Brigham, or something pretending to be her. And now she was all that remained. If I wanted answers, I'd have to return to where it began. The farmhouse was waiting for me, the key still fit, though the metal had tarnished green. As I crossed the threshold, a wave of cold air slid over my skin, thick and deliberate. The interior smelled of old soot and rain. I brought a flashlight this time. The beam cut through the dust in thin ribbons. The wallpaper hung in drooping sheets, the floral pattern eaten by time. The parlor was worse. Black scorch marks climbed the walls, spreading upward like veins. But on the far side of the room, above the ruined fireplace, something caught the light, a square outline, faint but visible, where a frame had once hung. I stepped closer. The wallpaper around it was slightly darker, less faded, as if protected from sunlight. The dimensions matched the cabinet card exactly. Someone had hung the family portrait here, and after the fire, it had been taken down. Or removed. I turned toward the staircase. The top landing disappeared into darkness, but I could smell something faint and sour, mold, or maybe rot. I climbed, each step moaning under my weight. The upstairs hallway was lined with doors, all swollen shut. I tried the first on the left. Inside was a bedroom half collapsed from years of weather. A child's bed frame leaned sideways, mattress long gone. A small bookshelf still stood, its contents warped and blackened. I pulled out one volume, Pilgrim's Progress, 1879 edition. Inside the front cover, written in a young girl's hand, Clara Brigham. The pages stuck together, but near the end a loose sheet fell out. It wasn't from the book. It was a diary page, torn along the edges and written in the same looping script. June 2nd, 1890. He came again. Father says not to speak of him, that the Lord tests us with deceivers, but he stands at the orchard gate each evening. He doesn't knock, just waits. Samuel saw him once and cried. Mother forbade us to look out the window after dusk. I read it twice. He came again. The words made the air feel thinner. There was more writing on the reverse. June 9th. I dreamt of him standing behind the photographer, whispering my name. When I woke, the smell of smoke filled my room, though no candle burned. The page ended there. My flashlight flickered and went out. I shook it until the beam returned, weaker than before. When I turned toward the door, the hallway beyond looked darker than it had seconds ago. A shape seemed to occupy the far end, tall, unmoving. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the longer I stared, the more defined it became. Shoulders, a head, an outline that absorbed illumination instead of reflecting it. I took one step forward, and the air grew colder. Then it was gone. I left the house in silence, the diary page folded in my pocket. That night I scanned the page under a black light. A faint watermark appeared along the bottom edge. Hollinsworth and Company. The same studio that had taken the photograph. Perhaps they'd known the family, maybe even the stranger. I searched the address and found that the building still existed, though converted into a thrift shop in downtown Salem. The next morning I drove there. The shopkeeper, an older man named O'Malley, looked puzzled when I asked about Hollinsworth. That old name again, he muttered. You're not the first to come asking. There's a cellar door in back leads to the old studio space, though it's condemned. Why? You writing a book or something? Something like that. He fetched a key from beneath the counter. Don't stay long, he warned. The air down there's foul. The basement stairs were narrow and steep. My flashlight beam trembled over cracked plaster and hanging pipes. At the bottom, the room widened into what had once been the studio. Glass skylights above, long shattered, their remains glittering like frost. The smell of chemicals lingered, decades old. On a bench sat an antique camera, its bellows folded, the brass lens clouded with grime. A faded backdrop still hung at one end of the room. Painted countryside, peeling in strips. Beneath it, a dark stain spread across the floorboards, round and uneven. Something crunched under my boot, a glass plate negative. I lifted it carefully to the light. The emulsion was flaking, but an image remained faintly visible. A man's face, partially obscured, his eyes overexposed to white circles. Written on the corner was a date, May 1890. I found another plate nearby, this one labeled Test Exposure. It showed the same man, closer, mouth open slightly as if speaking. Then, behind me, a soft click. The old camera shutter had released on its own. I spun around. Nothing moved. The lens faced me directly, its aperture wide, dark, like a pupil dilated in fear. My chest tightened. The smell of burnt sugar filled the air, the same scent that lingers after developing fluid overheats. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to leave. But before I reached the stairs, I saw something else. A ledger book on a shelf, its cover embossed clients 1888 to 1891. Inside, each page listed names, dates, and notes in tiny script. Near the middle, one entry caught my eye. June 14th, Brigham family. Group portrait. One additional figure requested by head of household, identified only as guest. Photographer instructed to use full exposure to capture spiritual presence. The note beneath, written in another hand, read simply, "Never again." The next entry was dated a year later with a single sentence. Mr. Hollinsworth deceased, cause unrecorded. I left the studio immediately, heart hammering, the ledger page photographed with my phone. Outside, the air felt thin and sharp. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing across the street. A tall man in dark clothes, motionless amid the crowd. When I blinked, he was gone. I returned to the farmhouse that evening, unable to explain why. The sun was setting, casting the fields in rust-colored haze. The well in the yard seemed deeper now, the planks rotted through. I could see faint water glinting below. The air above it shimmered faintly, like heat rising through the temperature had dropped. Inside, I followed the smell of smoke to the parlor again. Something new lay in the ashes of the fireplace. A fragment of cloth, half-burned, embroidered with the letter C. When I touched it, it crumbled. I sat on the hearth and took out my phone, zooming in on the scan of the family photograph. For the first time, I noticed a detail I'd missed before. In the stranger's hand, just visible against his dark trousers, was a small locket, and engraved upon it, enlarged, was the same letter, C. The diary page in my pocket felt heavier. I read it again, and this time the ink seemed darker, as if freshly written. He stands at the orchard gate each evening. He doesn't knock, just waits. I looked toward the window. The orchard, long dead, stretched out in tangled silhouettes, and at its far edge, near the line of trees, stood a figure, perfectly still. I blinked. Gone. My reflection in the glass stared back, pale and trembling. That night, I tried to leave. I packed my bag, started the car, and drove down the hill. But each turn of the road led me back to the same fork, the same leaning mailbox marked Brigham. I tried again, taking a different route. The result was the same. After the third attempt, the engine stalled. I sat there in the growing dark, listening. The night was absolutely silent. Then came a sound from the woods, not footsteps exactly, but a dragging rhythm, like something moving through leaves with care. When I finally reached the farmhouse again, I locked every door and window. The air inside had grown damp, oppressive. I heard faint tapping from upstairs, irregular, as if someone were brushing the walls with fingertips. I went to the parlor and turned the photo face down on the table, but the tapping continued, louder now. Then, a whisper, so close it brushed my ear. He's waiting. I woke to daylight streaming through broken glass. I must have fallen asleep in the chair. The photo lay face down where I'd left it, but the paper beneath was damp with condensation. When I lifted it, words had appeared in reverse on the table surface, imprinted by moisture. I could just make them out. Let me finish. That phrase haunted me the entire day. Finish what? I scoured local archives for more information. There were rumors, old folklore really, about a man called the Watcher at the Gate, a figure from regional superstition dating back to colonial times. Farmers claimed he appeared to those who had struck bargains with the wrong kind of preacher. Not quite witchcraft, not quite faith, but something older. They said he came to complete what was promised. The Brighams, devout and proud, might have believed they were doing God's work when they invited a spiritual presence into their home. But something else had come instead, something that demanded acknowledgement, and somehow, through the photograph, it still wanted it. At dusk, I gathered the album, the diary page, and the scanned copies. I drove once more to the house. My plan was simple: throw everything into the well and walk away for good. The sky bled orange as the sun sank behind the trees. The orchard looked like a field of blackened ribs. I pried the boards from the well and peered inside. Water shimmered faintly far below, reflecting a shape that wasn't mine. I dropped the album. It splashed, sending ripples across the surface. Then I tossed the diary page, watching it spiral down like ash. For a moment, everything was still. Then the reflection shifted, not rippling, but rising. A pale face broke the water's surface, featureless except for hollow eyes. The stench of sulfur filled the air. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, and landed hard. When I looked again, the well was empty, only darkness. But from its depths came a sound, low and resonant, like a voice underwater. "You invited me." I ran to the car, fumbling with the keys, but the headlights refused to turn on. The farmhouse windows glowed faintly from within, though no fire burned inside. I could see silhouettes moving across the curtains, 5 figures, one taller than the rest. The tallest turned toward the window. Even from the distance, I knew he was looking directly at me. I left Ipswich that night and checked into a motel an hour away. My clothes reeked of smoke. I turned on the television for noise, but the static drowned the sound. When I opened my suitcase, the album was inside, perfectly dry. That's when I stopped pretending it was coincidence. The stranger, whatever he was, wasn't bound to the photograph anymore. He'd found something stronger: acknowledgement. Every time I'd studied him, named him, spoken of him, I'd reopened the invitation. The guest had been welcomed again. Still, I couldn't stop looking. I needed to know what had really happened in 1891. I ordered copies of the coroner's reports and the church records from that year. Most were missing or redacted, but one entry from Reverend Ambrose Tillinghast caught my eye. July 2nd, 1891, delivered final rites to the Brigham household. The girl, Clara, not found. Her name omitted from the roll by parish request. Before dawn, parish bell rang itself 13 times, though the rope was tied. The handwriting ended abruptly there. A smear of ink trailed off the page like a fingerprint. When I looked up, the television screen had gone black. My reflection stared back, and over my shoulder, in the dim mirror above the motel desk, stood a tall figure in dark clothes, just visible before the screen flickered and went to snow. I didn't go home for 3 days. Sleep came in fragments, brief, gasping stretches that ended with the smell of smoke. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Brigham family seated before the camera, waiting for the flash. Only now I was behind the lens, and the stranger was standing beside me, whispering directions in a language I couldn't understand. I'd wake choking, my fingers cramped as if gripping something heavy. On the 4th night, I dreamed of Clara. She stood at the edge of the well, her dress soaked and clinging, hair matted to her face. She raised a hand as if to warn me, but when she opened her mouth, the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was deep, distant, the sound of earth shifting underground. He never left. Then she stepped backward into the dark. I woke with a start, heart hammering. My phone screen glowed with a notification. New file detected. Hollinsworth_album.tiff. I hadn't connected my scanner since Henry's death. Yet there it was, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. The same minute I'd woken. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The image was the familiar family portrait, only brighter, sharper, as if freshly taken. The stranger's face, once indistinct, now showed features I recognized. It was Henry. The resemblance was exact, the hollow cheeks, the slope of the brow, even the tiny scar near his lip. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, a trick of shadows, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. He'd taken the photograph with him when he died, and somehow it had taken him back. By dawn, I made my decision. I couldn't run from the thing anymore. I had to finish what the Brighams started. I packed a lantern, a crowbar, a recorder, and Henry's notes. Then I drove north to Ipswich, one last time. The fog was heavy that morning, rolling across the fields like tide water. The road to the farmhouse was nearly swallowed by weeds. When I reached the gate, I found it standing open, hinges rusted but recently moved. Someone, or something, had been here since my last visit. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual creak of settling wood had stopped. I lit the lantern and set up the recorder on the parlor mantel. My voice shook as I spoke into it. October 29th. Brigham property. Attempting to locate evidence of... The rest came out as a whisper. Presence. I didn't know what else to call it. The photograph still lay on the table where I'd left it in the dream, face up now, edges damp. The stranger's face had shifted again, no longer Henry's but mine. My breath fogged the air as I stepped closer. "What do you want?" I asked. For a moment, only silence. Then the faint sound of dripping water from somewhere beneath the floor. The well. I followed the noise through a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a cabinet. It opened onto narrow stairs descending into blackness. The smell hit me first. Stagnant water, old earth, and something metallic. My lantern flickered as I reached the bottom. A stone tunnel stretched out, slick with moss. At its end stood a wooden door, warped but intact. Scratched into the surface were letters carved by hand. Our guest. I raised the crowbar and pried it open. A gust of cold air burst out, extinguishing the lantern. In the brief dark before I relit it, something moved. Slow, deliberate. When the flame caught, I saw the room for what it was. The original Hollinsworth studio. The same backdrop, the same camera. But here, buried beneath the house. And lined along the walls, dozens of photographs nailed in rows. Everyone showed the Brighams, again and again. But the details changed subtly. The stranger moving closer, the family's smiles fading, the light dimming until in the final frame only he remained. I turned toward the camera, its lens pointed directly at me. The shutter clicked once. A voice behind me said, "You looked too long." I spun around. The stranger stood there, as real as any man, tall and thin, face half-shadowed. His skin looked wet, translucent, veins like ink beneath parchment. When he smiled, it wasn't with teeth, but with the parting of the flesh itself. "They asked for forever," he said, voice hollow. "A moment that would not fade." I gave it. "Who are you?" I managed. He tilted his head. "The witness." The walls shuddered. Water began seeping through the stones, dark and thick. The photographs curled in the moisture, the images dissolving. I backed toward the stairs, but the passage behind me was gone. Only the black water rising, inch by inch. "You brought them back," he murmured. You developed what was left. The water reached my knees, then my waist. I held the lantern high, its light trembling. What do you want from me? To finish the picture. He stepped closer, his reflection shimmering across the surface like oil. For an instant, I saw every face the photograph had ever taken. Clara, her parents, Henry, all layered atop his. Their mouths moved together. Say the word. I didn't know what word they meant. Maybe I said it anyway. When I woke, it was morning. I lay on the floor of the parlor, clothes soaked through, lungs burning as if I'd drowned. The lantern lay shattered beside me. The camera was gone. So was the photograph. Only one thing remained. The diary, open to a page I hadn't seen before. July 3rd, 1891. He said one day another would come who could see us, that when he did, we would be free. The ink stopped abruptly there, as if the pen had been pulled away mid-stroke. I closed the book. Outside, birds were singing, the first sound of life I'd heard near the property. For a brief, fragile moment, I thought it was over. But when I stepped onto the porch, the morning light struck the window just right, and I saw a reflection that didn't belong to me. A man standing in the doorway behind, face indistinct, head slightly bowed. By the time I turned, he was gone. Yet the air smelled faintly of burnt silver, the scent of old developing fluid. I left the farmhouse and didn't look back. I tried to rebuild my life after that. Sold my house, moved 3 states away. I stopped collecting antiques, stopped answering emails from museums. But the past has a way of finding you. One night, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph wrapped in linen. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The caption read, Hollinsworth and Company. 2024. The image showed a house I didn't recognize at first. Modern siding, satellite dish on the roof. Then I looked closer. My new address, printed neatly on the mailbox. And there, in the living room window, my reflection, and beside me, a tall, blurred figure, head tilted toward the camera. The back bore a single handwritten word. Guest. The next few days blurred, lights flickering, voices on phone lines that went dead. I started seeing faces in windows, faint outlines on polished glass. The smell of smoke followed me everywhere, inside elevators, along sidewalks, even in the cold breath of my refrigerator. It wasn't haunting anymore, it was occupation. Whatever I'd unleashed wasn't attached to the photograph. It had learned how to live without it. I considered destroying everything, computers, scans, notes, but that would only scatter the pieces. So instead, I decided to contain it. To do what the Brighams had failed to do. Seal the story in words, hold it within a single frame of memory. Writing is another kind of exposure, after all. You capture the moment and hope it never moves again. That's what this is. My final plate. My last attempt to confine the stranger before he learns new ways to cross. I went back to the farmhouse one last time, a month later, driven by the same grim curiosity that began it all. Snow covered the orchard, the well half buried in frost. Inside, the house was silent but whole again, the walls unburned, the wallpaper bright. A fire crackled in the parlor hearth. I should have fled, but the warmth was hypnotic. On the mantel stood a framed photograph, freshly printed, under pristine glass. I stepped closer. It was the Brigham family. The father's eyes bright, the mother's hands folded, the children smiling faintly. No stranger in the frame this time, just them. But as I stared, the faintest outline began to form behind them. A silhouette still in progress, shoulders first, then head, then me. I reached for the glass. My reflection overlapped the emerging image perfectly. The surface was warm, almost breathing. From somewhere behind the paper, a whisper rose. Say the word. My mouth opened before I could stop it. The camera flash was blinding. They found me a week later after the snowmelt flooded the fields. The authorities said I'd drowned in the well behind the Brigham house. The strange part, according to the report, was that there was no water in it. Just a layer of photographic plates, hundreds of them, each bearing the same image. A man seated among the Brigham family, smiling faintly, his face turned toward the lens. My face. No one could explain how the negatives developed themselves, or why the name Hollinsworth and Company had reappeared in gold letters on the farmhouse door. But locals still say that if you walk past the property after dark and glance at the window, you can see a faint flash, followed by the smell of burnt silver. And if you listen closely beneath the wind, you'll hear a shutter click once, twice, then stop. That's me, finishing the picture.